When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Vault. User: VRT3P. Posted September 3rd, 1997.
Were you to pick at random any list of haunted locations, the sort of thing tends to get published every Halloween by newspapers and magazines looking for a seasonal bump in sales, you'd likely see a number of familiar names. The Tower of London, the Queen Mary, and other stalwarts would likely be present and accounted for. While I have no doubt each of those locations enjoy their own unique sense of menace, had you asked me a year ago if I thought any of them could be haunted, I would have laughed in your face. However, I then had occasion to visit a place you will never find on any of those lists, but which is undoubtedly more haunted than all of them, and changed forever my view of the possible. Dr. Reinhard Becker may have been a physician once, but that's not what the people whose lives he touched will remember him as. No, Becker was a monster, a villain of the sort so legendary that had news of his crimes been allowed to reach the wider world, he would be mentioned in the same breath as Mengele. As a former war correspondent, I can tell you that it takes a great deal to turn my stomach. In fact, prior to the unexpected discovery of Dr. Becker's work while on assignment in Louisiana, I had thought my capacity for disgust to be burned away. How very wrong I was. My work in the Pelican State was of no great importance, I'm sad to say. The sort of magazine expose of local politics which pays but does nothing to excite the soul. I was sitting in the waiting room at the city hall of a small city I won't name, biding my time while an assistant fetched the records I needed. The humidity was extraordinary, not a million miles removed from the jungle, a connection which, when made, caused me to shift uncomfortably in my seat. Those were not memories which I cared to conjure. My unexpected slide into reverie was interrupted by an exclamation from an office across the hallway, behind a wooden door with no markings on its frosted glass window. "Something has to be done about the place," shouted an impassioned voice in a thick but educated-sounding southern drawl. "Errol," a second, calmer speaker said, "please keep your voice down." Both men's voices then dropped, prompting me to unstick myself from the clammy leather seat and creep across the hallway as silently as possible. Once I was close enough to again hear them speak, I pretended to be examining a wall of nearby plaques. "There's something wrong with it, and you know it." Again, this was the passionate speaker. "Don't tell me you believe in ghosts, Errol," the second speaker said. "Belief in the occult is a sin." "You want to lecture me about sin? A monument to the very devil himself still stands in defiance of all that is good and holy, oozing pure malice with every single day it is allowed to exist, and you want to lecture me about sin. I think you forgot who put you in this office." The second man's tone changed, becoming more conciliatory. "Errol, I haven't forgotten anything. Believe me, I'm working on it. It's just a jurisdictional nightmare. With Becker dead, it's not clear who owns the land, and I've heard the police are considering going back in with ground-penetrating radar. If they think there's more evidence, they can't knock the place down." "What more evidence do they need? The son of a bitch is dead. May he rot. If anything, refusing to bulldoze his compound just allows his memory to continue growing." "It can't grow, Errol. You know that. We managed to keep it out of the papers." Before I could hear any more, the assistant I'd been waiting for made his ill-timed return, and I had to follow him back to a distant corner of the records room, leaving behind my newfound mystery. The question of who Becker was and what he did that was so bad Errol wanted to bulldoze every reminder of him back into the earth gnawed at the back of my mind all evening. The next morning, following a particularly dull series of interviews with several figures of varying minor municipal importance, I went back to City Hall. The air conditioning was working slightly better this time, and I was spared any unpleasant introspection. Making sure to find a different clerk than the one I'd worked with already, I mentioned that the previous day I had spent some time discussing the purchase of land from a man named Errol, but since the conversation had been spontaneous, a result of a chance meeting outside the building, he had neglected to give me his business card. The smiling clerk, a sunny blonde girl in her 20s who was entirely too helpful for this line of work, was only too happy to help without any further questions asked. His full name was Errol LaForche, she said, and he lived on an estate several miles outside city limits. "I'm surprised Mr. LaForche was chatty with you, sir. No offense, but he's not known to be a friendly man." "You don't say. He seemed like a real peach to me." Preliminary research into Errol LaForche was enough to tell me that further investigation was pointless. He had enough money to buy more privacy than I could pierce without a publication backing me. My only avenue of approach was the direct one, a phone call, answered by what had to be his housekeeper, who initially told me that Mr. LaForche was out of the house. There's a certain kind of person whom lying is second nature. The housekeeper was not among them. When I instructed her to tell Mr. LaForche I wanted to talk about Becker, there was a long silence before the voice I'd heard in City Hall picked up the line. "Hang up the phone, Rose. Who is this?" "Mr. LaForche?" "Speaking. I ask you again, sir. Who is this?" "My name is Walter Matheson. I'm a freelance writer in town, working on a piece for Harper's." Silence. "Mr. LaForche?" "Yes, I'm still here. This entire conversation is off the record, or I hang up right now." "Understood. We're speaking off the record." "Who talked?" "I'm sorry?" "About Becker. Who talked? There's no way you found this out on your own." "Actually, sir, it was you. I overheard your conversation in City Hall the day before last." Several more seconds passed in silence. I didn't know what the man looked like, and yet it took no effort at all to imagine him grinding his teeth at the prospect of having only himself to blame. God damn it, God damn it. Who's Becker, Mr. LaForche, and what did he do that's so bad they want to scour his property with ground-penetrating radar? He let out a sigh. Son, even if I could tell you, I wouldn't know where to start. Even off the record? Even off the record. It's bad enough you heard what you did. Of course, if they'd done their goddamn jobs in the first place, I wouldn't have had to go there and give them hell. Another gap in the conversation. I could feel him teetering on the edge of a decision and knew that saying anything could tip him in the wrong direction. After almost a full minute of silence, LaForche came back on the line. County Road 42. 5 miles past the turnoff with the state highway. You'll pass a set of wrought iron gates. Those belong to me. Keep going until you start to feel a heaviness in your chest, then keep an eye out for a driveway on the right. I can't tell you who Becker was or what he did, but if they're going to let that living nightmare continue to exist, then I can't stop you from going there and finding out for yourself. I read his directions back to him, pausing at the bit about heaviness to see if he chuckled or otherwise gave away the joke, getting nothing in return. That's exactly right, and Mr. Matheson, 2 final things. Yes, sir? Be out of there before nightfall. However empty it looks, I promise you it's not, and after dark, it becomes dangerous. And the second? Don't ever call here again. Despite my burgeoning curiosity, I first had to pass several dreary days of work before finally being able to venture forth into the countryside. The intervening period had done nothing to moderate the temperature, so that by the time my rental car was taking the left at County Road 42, even the sweet gum trees and pokeweed seemed to sag under the humidity's weight, and I sympathized. For a man of LaForche's wealth, the road leading to his property was surprisingly narrow and rough, which I took to mean he was the rare rich man who valued his privacy above displays of wealth. Even the gates preventing access to his driveway were more utilitarian than expected. Heavy, wrought iron with little adornment. I slowed down as I passed, craning my neck to perhaps catch a glance at the man should he happen to be walking up the immaculately kept blacktop, but it was not to be. Several minutes of driving later, I found myself absent-mindedly rubbing a hand across my chest. Even with the rental's air conditioning at full blast, the air seemed dense enough to press me down into the cloth seats. It was then I recalled LaForche's remark about heaviness and looked to my right in time to see what was left of a gravel road disappearing into a green tangle of creeper vines. I slammed on the brake pedal, screeching to a halt before reversing back level with what could only be the driveway I'd come to find. Whatever signage had marked this place, if any, was long gone, leaving it flanked by twin pawpaw trees, themselves fighting a losing battle with the self-same vines that had claimed dominion over the driveway. The heaviness in my chest was unmistakable now and flummoxed me. Was it a function of air pressure? Taking 1, 2, and finally a third deep breath, enough to establish that I was not having any difficulty breathing, I pointed the rental down the road which had once led to a man named Becker.
Subject, The Vault, Part 2. User, VRT3P. Posted, September 3rd, 1997.
The further down Becker's driveway I went, the thicker the underbrush became. I could hear creeper vines and cowitch scraping along the rental car's undercarriage. When the forest finally opened up, I was looking at a much bigger compound than I had expected. A series of low-slung white marble buildings jumbled together like the toys of some inattentive child giant. The pressure LaForge told me to watch out for was stronger here, and I didn't know what to make of it. Opening the rental car door to give myself some space, I expected to hear the usual sounds of lowland Louisiana. Bugs, birdsong, frogs out in the wetlands. Some years prior to this, I had done a piece on a strike breaking in the Kentucky mining industry. Some of the workers had taken me down into a pit, so I could see the conditions under which they were being forced to labor. What I experienced down there was something more than silence, an absence not only of sound but of its possibility, as if the uncountable tons of rock above you had swallowed the world. That's what was waiting for me when I got out of my car on Becker's compound. An unshakable feeling that everything else had fallen away, and the moss-draped structures in front of me were the only thing remaining. Several of the roofs had collapsed, owing no doubt to a combination of creeping rot and vegetation, the latter of which was now spreading along their outer walls like fungus. In fact, for all I know about the plant life of that region, fungus it very well could have been. Within seconds of being outside, my clothes became limp with sweat, sticking to me like a soggy second skin. As I've said before, I was a combat photographer who has seen his share of human suffering, along with no shortage of man-made horrors, and yet a voice within me called for a return to the rental car, followed by a swift exit back to the safe blandness of municipal politics. Of course, that voice was shouted down by another, louder one. The one which had led me into those situations in the first place, and so I began walking towards the largest of the remaining buildings. I couldn't get over the fact that despite all the nature around me, not a single creature, great or small, raised its voice. Instead, the only thing I heard was LaForge, his warning, rattling around in my head. Be out of there before nightfall. However empty it looks, I promise you it's not, and after dark, it becomes dangerous. Like the others around it, the building in front of me appeared to be a single floor, stretching back the length of a football field. 3 steps led up to a large archway in which was carved the words, Becker Institute for the Advancement of Reason. What had once been heavy wooden entry doors lay broken on the ground, bearing the unmistakable signs of having been broken by a police battering ram. Inside was the remains of what had once been a reception area, everything on its broad desk from a typewriter to stationery, abandoned and grown over with the same combination of vines and moss I had seen outside. Long, tubular flowers in bright golden red grew up from between the typewriter keys as if nature were employing its own clumsy metaphor to let us know ownership of this place had changed hands. I passed through another portal, ragged chunks of wood poking out from corroded hinges, the only sign it had ever had doors. What did Reinhard Becker do to advance the cause of reason here? I wondered. It certainly sounded ominous, and even without the parts of its reputation I knew, altruism was hardly the first impulse likely to thrive in a place so intentionally remote. Further in, a carved sign reading Patient Intake hung above a row of rotting leather chairs across from another desk. A row of filing cabinets lined the wall behind that desk on either side of an entryway leading to a separate file storage area. What I found over the next hour were primarily patient intake documents, hundreds of them, all describing various kinds of undesirable behavior. Perhaps not surprisingly, knowing the history of institutions such as these, I noted that the primary complaints in the documentation were not the patients themselves, but rather family members unable or unwilling to understand the particular quirks of their loved ones. On the back of the water-stained forms was a list of checkboxes intended for staff only. The options were primary intake, aggression ward, work detail, sensory deprivation. The final option, sensory deprivation, was only rarely used, seemingly only in cases of patients experiencing extreme despair. While there were discharge documents for patients in the first 3 categories, at no point did I find a single shred of paperwork to indicate anyone designated under the last line item had ever left the facility. Despite the oppressive heat, a chill prickled the hairs of the base of my neck. From intake, I proceeded down the fungus-choked corridor to a large, formerly white room designated as admitting. There was no information here apart from what appeared to be examination tables, their waterlogged covers swollen and dripping. It appeared that after being assessed, patients were led down a narrow corridor, the entrance to which was at the room's rear. I followed it, a touch of claustrophobia rising as the walls funneled me toward a warren of offshoot hallways. Over the next several hours, I explored the crumbling building, gleaning enough to understand that patients who were deemed physically well enough were put to work maintaining the facility itself. One could only imagine the limited therapeutic value of this was of less interest than the savings inherent in not having to hire maintenance staff. It was almost mundane in its cynicism. The aggression ward was exactly what it sounded like, a series of padded rooms, their walls streaked with deep brown smears which could only be blood. On the floor, the shredded remains of mattresses had been trampled into a slurry of human waste. This was more what I had expected, that perfection of suffering you only tend to find in places where ultimate power is wielded. Of course, I had no way yet of knowing that the perfection of suffering was the entire point of the Becker Institute. Throughout my explorations, though I found many mentions of Dr. Becker, there was surprisingly little evidence of his direct involvement and very little insight into the peculiarities of his personality. Was he a garden variety megalomaniac, I wondered, a sadist, or a would-be visionary so blinded by his own zeal that he truly believed he was helping people? I found the answer in his office, a large room tucked away down a winding series of dogleg hallways. Every other door leading up to his opened on what appeared to be a series of small consultation rooms, their narrow windows allowing a slim rectangle of orange light to enter. So when the final door revealed itself to be a spacious wood-paneled rotunda, I felt momentary vertigo. In addition, there was a rush of stale air, as if the room had been pressurized. No trace of the rot which infested the rest of the compound could be found here, likely owing to the sealed door. A glass dome let in enough rose-colored sunlight to see the circular walls were taken up by thick shelves supporting hundreds of books. Many of them appeared to be both old and valuable, the legible titles having names like The Rise and Fall of Al-Alamand and Le Labyrinth de Dessous. Others were titled in languages I couldn't speak, and still more in spattered bursts of hooks and lines I could only make out, let alone understand. The curiosity aroused in me by these unusual volumes was tempered by an unexpected revulsion at the thought of examining them more closely. In fact, that revulsion extended towards everything in this room, even though nothing I could currently see appeared to be out of the ordinary under the circumstances. Another desk, the largest I had yet seen, stood at the center of everything. Its drawers had been violently pulled out, no doubt during the arrest, their contents scattered across the floor. The signature on these documents confirmed my suspicion that this was indeed the office of Dr. Reinhard Becker. Correspondence was unremarkable, primarily day-to-day administrative edicts, and I had just about decided there was nothing else to see when, from where I had knelt on the floor, I spied an unusual groove in the footwell of Becker's desk. Crawling closer, I notched my fingers into the wood, running them up the channel until I found a button. Pressing it caused me to jump as a heretofore hidden shelf dropped loudly into view. The shelf contained a neat row of notebooks, each with a different series of dates handwritten on the spine. Carefully, I pulled out the most recent book, beginning my education into the life of one Reinhard Becker, Ph.D. While describing the interior life of this man would require more space than I have here, suffice it to say that he was truly, irrevocably insane. A German Nazi who had fled to South America following Hitler's death, Becker had been lured out of hiding by the promises of Operation Paperclip, an American program finally revealed to the public in 1973, intended to derive value from the Reich scientists. The man was obsessed with the concept of suffering, the purest form of which he believed was divine, God's love made flesh. Under the guise of behavioral science, Becker had operated his hospital in the American South with the barest of oversight until the 1980s, at which point all supervision ceased and he was allowed to explore his mad theories to the fullest. This is where the horror truly began. Without anyone requiring him to justify his methods, Becker began to spiral alongside a staff who were just as sadistic as he and all too eager to assist him in carrying out his experiments. The vault was the end result of this insanity. This was the sensory deprivation referred to by the intake forms, the name itself a cruel joke. What happened in the vault was the opposite of sensory deprivation. It was sensory overload. Pure torture, the likes of which I could never have even imagined, but were lovingly described in the notebook's pages. Burning coals forced into the orifices of bound patients, their screams muffled by nettle masks, bodies ripped apart by hooked chains, orderlies at either side tugging until their muscles bulged and the deformed flesh before them gave way. 1,000 other torments which will forever haunt my thoughts were contained in those notebooks, all of them with a single aim: to draw so much of God's purest love to a single point in time and space that reality fractured, and he had no choice but to pay attention. In disgust, I flung the notebook away from me, pages fluttering as it struck the office's far side. It was then I noticed the fading day. The orange and then rose glow I had seen earlier was sunset. I had been here much longer than I realized. Even without LaForche's admonition, I'd seen all I cared to in that benighted place. I made to leave and was stopped by a thin sliver of white on the wall above where the discarded notebook lay. It was electrical light, the only such example of which I'd seen this entire time. Cautiously, I rounded the desk and approached the illumination. After only having covered half the distance, a terrible smell filled my nostrils, worse by far than any I had yet encountered, a thick copper funk which coated the palate. Closer to the wall, I realized I was looking at a door, previously hidden among the wooden paneling. I pushed it open, bracing myself and yet still being unready for the grotesque stench's full force. This could only be the vault. My stomach heaved and I bent double, gagging. Before me was a 10 by 10 room with a drain in its floor, tiled in what had once been white and was now stained, caked in every color contained by the human body. The descriptions of nearly unimaginable slaughter contained in Becker's notebooks, detailed though they may have been, could never have prepared me for the sight of that room, for the strips of raw meat dangling from its ceiling, or the blackened, pulped bones collected in its corners. It exists beyond nightmare, beyond cruelty, belonging to a category of malice I refuse to grace with anything so dignified as a name. Finally, I understood why its neighbors so badly wanted this facility razed to the ground. Better still, to salt the earth afterward so that nothing might again grow from such cursed soil. How long I stood there, my mind trying and failing to chart the scale of inhumanity, I can't say. What I do know is that a voice brought me back to my senses. Beautiful, isn't it? It spoke in smooth tones with the barest hint of a Germanic accent. I blinked, wheeling around to find the rotunda as empty as before. "Who's there?" I demanded of the emptiness. "You know who I am," the voice calmly said. "Open your mind. Allow yourself to see the truth of what is in front of you." At this, I became aware of a gathering darkness in the vault's far corner, seemingly indifferent to the harsh fluorescent light above. Within those shadows, something moved, a shape approximating a human face, crafted purely of an inky blackness, even more severe than that surrounding it. My mind reeled at the impossibility of what I was seeing. Surely, I reasoned, it had to be a trick of the light. This can't be. My own voice sounded uncertain, almost whining. And yet it is. You've read my journals. You understand the work I did here. What you see before you is proof of its success. So, yes, you know exactly who I am, but who are you? 1,000 thoughts spun out across my mind, followed by 1,000 more questions. Dr. Reinhard Becker was dead, and yet, in my confusion, the truth felt like the only solid course of action. "I'm a journalist," I finally said. "Ein Schriftleiter, yes, of course." His face approximated a sneer. Nosing about in the affairs of others like a rat, the fatherland had ways of dealing with vermin such as yourself, methods which your country has heretofore been reluctant to employ. What do you hope to gain by your snooping? A story? No one will ever let you write about this place. I'm not here for a story. I'm here because Errol LaForge is trying to have all this burned to the ground, and I wanted to know why. Becker's shadow smiled without a trace of warmth. Ah, Errol, a proud Errol. Has he told you about Dorothy? Sweet Dorothy, driven to my door by her father, tired of the mess he'd made. I wager he hasn't. Nor will he ever tell you how it was that young woman came to be in such a state. Rest assured that Herr LaForge is not driven by an inflamed sense of moral outrage, only a pathetic belief that to scour this place from the earth will absolve him of his sins. It will not. What did you do to the girl? LaForge's daughter? The presence tutted. You know very well what I did to her. I purified her, distilled her pain and that of so many others. Because you wanted to draw the attention of God? The vanity of a mere man. In the end, I drew the attention of something much grander than that. This hospital has become its temple, and I but a humble priest. It comes on night's tide, and you should not be here when it does. Scurry, young man, while you still can. Becker's shadow was gone as if it had never been there, leaving me alone with the mingled smells of murder and ozone. Every instinct which had kept me alive during my days on the battlefield screamed at me to run, so I did just that, out of the rotunda and back through the series of doglegs to admitting, echoes of my footfall swallowed up by the spreading greenery. That pressure which had first manifested itself by the roadway was now almost unbearable. A lead weight compressing my lungs and heart until it felt as though I must fight for each breath. Outside, dust was quickly gathering in the trees, and I was overcome with a terrible foreboding. Becker hadn't been lying. Something was coming, something big. With great effort, I swung the rental car's door open, climbing inside with the breathless relief of a marathoner crossing their finish line. Mercifully, the engine fired on the first try, and I swung the car in a wide reverse arc, slamming on the gas as night fully came on, washing across my path like a tidal wave. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I had to reach the main road. Somehow I knew that only then would I be safe. Pressure narrowed my vision to a long, dark tunnel with the road ahead shrunk down to a pinprick. Drawing on my ever-shrinking resolve, I focused hard on that pinprick and drove, tearing up the cover of foliage beneath my wheels with a final, full-throated scream I didn't realize had come from me until much later my rental car burst out onto County Road 42, and the world returned.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.